Good evening, ladies and gents. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, once again, it is my very great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight and to thank you all very much indeed for coming to support this event. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jim Mingus. I think quite a number of us have spoken to each other, I think, through emails over the last week or two, so it's fine to see faces that they have spoken to. It's almost 2 years since we last had John Borland here to give an excellent illustrated talk on the Picts, who, where and when. And John, we're delighted to have you back with us again tonight. For those of you that weren't fortunate enough to be at that talk, it was recorded and it's available on YouTube, and if you want to hear that talk, then just if you just put into your YouTube search bar and just John Borland St Vigeans, and you'll probably find it that way. The plan for tonight is to ask John to present his illustrated talk, Warriors and War on Pictish Stones. We will then give you the opportunity to ask John any questions you may have, and we hope that you'll be able to join us for some light refreshments after that, and you'll have a chance to maybe have a one-to-one chat with John if you like, or get to know some of your like-minded, get to know some of the like-minded folks that are here tonight. A couple of points to note. Where are the toilets? You passed them just as you came in through the main door. They're on your right-hand side there. The fire doors, that we can exit via that door there, or out through the door that you came in. So, the mention was made of St Vigeans Heritage Group, and we're a very informal group at the moment who have a common interest in the village and its history, and also in the surrounding area. We hope to organise a range of events and gather and catalogue historical information about the area. If you're interested in what we are getting up to, you can join our WhatsApp group by adding your name and mobile number to some of the sheets that I'll leave perhaps on some of the tables here. If you jot your name down, put your mobile number in, we'll add you to our WhatsApp group. Now, I first met John Borland more years ago than we care to remember John, I think. As I was walking through the village, the Pictish Stone Museum, the door was open. I peeked inside, and there was a man sitting concentrating in front of an easel with some drawing tools in his hand, focusing on a stone that had light shining across the face of it in order to enhance the detail. I had a brief and very interesting conversation with him about his work and about the stones. I couldn't remember if John had a beard at that time. He assured me that he did have, but it was of a different colour, he said.
It was pink then.
Back in the 70s, obviously. So, my next encounter with John was in August of 2022, again in the museum, where he was giving an explanation about the stones to the Borland Historic Society, about what the Picts and about what the stones were all about. His passion for and knowledge of the subject was obvious to me, and I was delighted when later that day he agreed to come at a later date to give the talk the following spring. John worked as an archaeological surveyor for 36 years, primarily with the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Scotland, and latterly with Historic Environment Scotland. He retired as Measures Survey Manager in 2020. During his career, he had the opportunity to survey almost every type of archaeological and architectural monument, from Neolithic chambered cairns to World War II coastal batteries. However, He had and continues to have a particular interest in Scotland's unparalleled corpus of Pictish and early medieval sculpture, recording well over 1,000 carved stones of that period. John was also editor and president of the Pictish Art Society for 11 and 10 years respectively. Ladies and gents, I ask you to give a very warm St. Vigeans welcome to John Borland.
Thank you very much, Jim. Hopefully this microphone will work. It is a pleasure to be back. The first talk I gave a couple of years ago was a basic introduction to the Picts, who we are when, but we ended up looking very much at their sculpture, the sculpture stones, which is probably the most tangible evidence that we have for their existence. Tonight we're going to be looking at a specific topic on these stones, and that's images of warriors in war on the Pictish sculpture. I put this talk together, as you can see from the front slide here, for a conference back in 2018, I can't believe it was 7 years ago, organised by the Society of Church Archaeology. 2018, of course, was the centenary of the end of the First World War, so the whole conference was based around that kind of theme. I have since done a lot of upgrading of the images on the talk, not least to reflect work that I've actually done since then, and we'll come to that as we go on. So, a little bit, this conference was held in Hull, which is probably further south than most Picts ever got. So I did put a little bit of general introduction into the talk, so we will cover that as we go. For those of you who were here before, it will be a repetition, but it's going to be brief. So, who were the Picts? Well, they were one of three native inhabitants of what we now call Scotland, shown on the map here in pink red, occupying by far the biggest part of the land. The neighbours to the south were Brythonic people, who were culturally, linguistically very similar to the Britons that inhabited the rest of Britain all the way down to England. Speakers Old Welsh. The Picts, we don't know their language, but it probably was a form of Old Welsh. It's quite easy to see commonalities in some of the words. Place names with Aber crop up in Pictland and they crop up in Wales. So it's probably some form of Old Welsh. And then sandwiched in the middle of the west were the Gaels, Scots, with strong political and cultural ties to the north-east of Ireland, and they were Gaelic speakers. And then into this map, that yellow area of Britons, into that area the Anglo-Saxons eventually push. Yes, into that yellow area of the Britons, eventually the Anglo-Saxons, who had taken over control of most of England, started to push northward, and they really put the squeeze on the Brythonic peoples, taking more than half of that territory under their own, and carrying on to push northward against the Picts also, and we will come to that, the battles that are fought for that attempt at expansion will feature in our talk today. And then, of course, by the 780s and then certainly by the 800s, the Vikings arrive and they start to put the squeeze on everybody. They take the Northern Isles, Shetland, Orkney, Caithness, Sutherland, Eastern Ross, Western Ross, most of the Outer Hebrides. They start to impinge on the Anglo-Saxons down in the southwest. They sail up the Clyde and put an impinge on the Britons there. And they're also impinging on the Scots, the Gaels in the west. So they really put the squeeze on everybody. So that's who. What's in a name? Well, again, I touched upon this at the last talk. 2nd century, the Romans are in control of most of southern Britain, so from most of England right the way up into southern Scotland, and they chart all the different tribes in the north who they have to deal with. Sometimes they're making treaties and buying them off, sometimes they're at war with them. And they charted all the different tribes of, well, we'll call it Scotland, it wasn't called Scotland then, but all the different tribes. And none of them were called Picts. That name doesn't appear there, and it doesn't arrive until near the end of the 3rd century. When this chap, Numenius, is writing a panegyric, he's writing a eulogy about how great Rome is. The Roman people, the Roman Empire, is the emperor, he's extolling the virtues of all, and he has a bit go at these painted people, the Picti, north of their northern border, who are giving them jip, and they're not playing fair, they're giving them a hard time, and so it's unlikely that he coined this name. I think if he's writing it in continental Europe in 297, it's probably in common play by then, especially amongst the legionaries who are on this northern frontier. And at that point, it's unlikely that the Picts themselves, the people north of Hadrian's Wall, called themselves Picts. I think it's a catch-all for all of those tribes, and it's not a complimentary one, it's a pejorative thing. And Alex Wolff from St Andrews, he came up with, I think, a really good analogy. The term redskins as used by European settlers in Northern America to refer to all the different Native American peoples, just as one catch-all and not very complimentary handle. And I think probably Picti was coined in the same way. It means painted people, so we don't know exactly what that means. Were they tattooed or was it war paint? I like to put up a picture of it here just to show how scary it potentially could be. We don't know what it meant, but because there is no written documentation that defines why they were referred to as the painted people. But presumably it was something that they applied to themselves. Nice little bit of evidence, though. This is a dice tower from the 4th century. It was actually found in Germany, but presumably taken there by a legionary who had been on the front line in Hadrian's Wall. And it has, this is the sort of thing where they were big into their gambling, the Romans, and it was all about the chance, the gods are in charge of how the dice are going to fall. And this purpose of this thing is you drop your dice into the tower, the open top, and they tumble down those little steps. And that's, whether the gods favour you or not, whether you come up with 3 6s or whatever. And the little inscription on the front of the tower translates as the Picts are defeated, the enemy deleted, play in safety. So nice to think that somewhere on that Hadrian's Wall, that northern frontier, there was some tradesman celebrating the fact that the Romans had successfully put down some kind of attack or insurrection and was churning these things out and selling them to legionaries to take around the rest of the empire. Around the same time, Roman and Romano-British references start to talk about the Scoti, the people in the Gaels and the sort of west, roughly the area equivalent to modern Argyll. And again, there seems to be a less than complimentary name. It's not the name of a tribe or of a people or a nationality. It's applied to them as some kind of put down. There are various interpretations to it. It might mean pirate, some people reckon, or horde. But it's, again, just a handle that seems to have been applied and which then sticks. And so, yeah, the name Pict lives on in post-Roman Britain, and it's adopted by the Brythonic, the Anglo-Saxon sources, the Scots, the Irish. All of these people who are writing about their interactions with the people of North and North East Scotland, they refer to them as the Picts. And it seems that if the whole world is calling it a Pict, you might as well answer to them, and it looks as if the Picts themselves then just adopted it. We must be Picts because that's what everybody calls us. We've got very little written history from the Picts themselves, hardly anything survives. A couple of versions of kings' lists here and there are being written in the 12th century, so if they did have a written tradition, we've lost it for one reason or another. Yeah, nothing much in the way of written history, but the most tangible thing that they left us with was a fabulous assemblage of stone sculpture. Most notably, the iconic Pictish symbol stones. I don't like to use the word mysterious or enigmatic because it's been applied to the symbol stones for such a long time, and it ended up for a long time making the Picts, oh, they must be enigmatic, they must be mysterious, and they weren't. We're in the unfortunate position of having very little written documentation about them, and certainly virtually nothing from them. But they were native Celtic people with their own traditions, which were not that far removed from everybody else, and in that sense, they sit very nicely into their own slot within the British Isles, culturally and politically. But the symbols are beautiful. Nobody knows what they mean. General consensus, there's 101 readings of them, interpretations, but the general consensus is that it's some form of writing, maybe developed as a direct response to inscribed stones placed around the countryside by the Romans. They were putting little milestones along their walls to commemorate who built this section, and it may be that this was, and they had carvings of their gods and whatever else, so it may be that this was the Pict's response to that. And the general consensus is that they are maybe personal names. So it might be a gravestone, it might be a marker for some other reason, but one symbol over another may be read as a person's name. And I think there's a little bit of evidence to support that theory. Eventually they then evolve into carving more elaborate sculpture. Upon their conversion to Christianity, we get freestanding crosses and cross slabs. That was their sculpture of choice. This cross slabs outnumber everything else by a factor of about 3 or 4 to 1, maybe even more. But fabulous exponents of the art. So, coming back to the topic for tonight, images of warriors in war. Difficult to make out this one, but this is the sort of pillar at Colessi with a warrior carved on it. So, if you look carefully, you can see. Oh, doesn't work with the screen. No. Okay, if you look carefully, you can see at the top, rounded head, he's got quite a big prominent ear, definitely a big nose. He's holding a shield with his left arm, and in his right hand he's holding a spear with a sort of leaf spearhead, and you can't really make it out, but down at the bottom the spear ends in a round knob. And he appears to be naked. There doesn't appear to be any line of clothing or anything on him. And this is one of about half a dozen similar images. There's one in the caves at East Weems in Fife, another one like this. There's one in Aberdeenshire, there's one in Angus, so they're dotted around, and they're probably quite early. This one was found, I think, around about 2016, when they were putting in that ridiculous road junction that's just to the west of Perth, where you have to head north before you can come south. Workmen were moving a great big lump of stone, a massive thing, about a ton, and somebody spotted that there was carving on it, and there it is, it's another naked warrior Similar, big nose, big head, big bum. He does appear maybe to be wearing booties or something. There's a line across the ankles that may indicate footwear. And definitely, as you can see, the leaf blade on the spear and the knob. And for those of you that are more attentive, and I don't want to be too indelicate about this, but he does appear to be holding himself in the left hand. That's not 100% certain that the stone is eroded and weathered away, but for my money, I think he is brandishing more than one offensive weapon. Let's just leave it at that. This particular figure, this naked warrior, gets lumped in with the Pictish symbols because they're definitely Pictish. They are appearing in Pictland, and they're probably quite early, but maybe 4th, 5th century. But I don't think they function as part of that symbol language with the other sort of animal symbols and geometric symbols that we saw. I think that this is imparting a different message, but it is symbolic and it is Pictish, so by that sense it gets put in with the Pictish symbols. It has been suggested, and I think quite convincingly, that it may actually be a portrayal of the Iron Age god Osiris, who was the god of war and hunting, who gets adopted by the Romans when they're here, because for them he's very much akin to Mars, who was the god of war and hunting for them. And as you can see from this little Iron Age sculpture, he's also sporting a rectangular shield, a spear, and you can also see that he is displaying his manhood. So, quite possible, I think, that it's quite convincing that it is Osiris. And the inimitable Professor Gordon Noble, who was digging at the hill fort at the top of East Lomond in Fife last year, came up with one of these spear buttons on it, a fabulous find to have. So we do see as we go on that things that are portrayed in the stone, on these carvings, are probably fairly accurate to the actual material culture that they are depicting. You couldn't have anything on the images of warriors or Pictish sculpture without having Grimy Man. This is just a stunning thing. It's quite a big stone as well. And there he is with his axe over his shoulder, sharp pointy teeth, and either some kind of headgear or it's the first ever recorded mullet. Who knows? But definitely scary. Again, getting roped in with Pictish symbols, it's very much part of that, but it's not a common one that reappears again and again and again. So uncertain as to what it's depicting, whether it's part of this language or whether it's some god or demon or legendary thing from their history or their culture. But a superb image. And then getting closer to home, just up the road at Kerry, we've got this is in the Beacon Institute, and excuse me, not really a warrior as such, but one of the most common depictions on cross slabs are hunting scenes. But going out on the hunt was fairly similar to going out to war. So if we're looking closely to the figure at the top there he is in his plated saddlecloth with his spear and his sword at his side. So it's a very good, I think, accurate depiction of what some Pictish noble would have looked like if he was riding out to war. Note also the close proximity of the little Pictish symbol to the man. So again, maybe reinforcing that this is a name, this is it's just any person going out to the hunt, it's this person. with that symbol, and within his locality that double disc and Z rod would be identifiable as him. I think it's an interesting, just as a side point, if you cast your mind back to those symbol stones that we looked at in one of the early slides, where they're incised and they've got a clarity, they've got a graphic clarity and poise about them, elegance. This one, by example, that Z rod's not really Z, it's a bit limp, it looks more like an old stalk of celery that's past its base. So as the sculpture moves on, the symbols start to lose a lot of their life, a lot of their vibrancy, which again, that's a topic for debate, probably for bigger brains than mine, but it's definitely, as someone who's recorded these things, you definitely see a diminution in their quality as the sculpture evolves. But a lovely image of a Pictish noble who could very easily be riding out to war. This is a little stone, tiny little thing from Needle in Perthshire, in the museum there. And once again, it's got some nice fine detail in there. You can see he's got the sword that's coming out from under his cloak there, and you can see the incised spear, which the tip comes down under the horse's snout, and the shaft runs up, coming out from behind him. But of particular note is that little terminal at the end of the sword scabbard. It's called a chape, and it's a little metal bit that reinforces the end of the scabbard. Scabbard would be made of wood or leather, but the chape is metal and it reinforces the tip of it. And it's just really nice little simplistic representation on a stone of the real thing. This is a chape from the St. Ninian sword found in Shetland with animal terminals on it, oriented in the same way. So again, reinforcing the fact that even in their simplistic form, these sculptures are giving us good, reliable evidence for Pictish material culture. Close to home, the Drosston Stone, which is just across the way in the museum there, and of course down at the bottom of the side opposite the cross we have our little kneeling crossbow man. Very definitely a crossbow. You can see the bolt set within the stock of the crossbow, and you can see by the way he's holding it that it's not a bow and arrow. He would have his one arm out on the bow part. He's pulling back the string and with his other hand on the trigger mechanism, and he's heading, facing off a charging wild boar. Lovely detail in this. There's some evidence of crossbows being used in late Roman era. They don't become a very common instrument until about the 12th century, where they become popular with kings and warlords simply because you don't need to be all that skilled to use them. You need to be skilled to be a bowman. You need incredible strength to pull a bow and skill to aim it or to fire it in an arc that it's going to hit somebody at the other end. But these things that point and shoot, so you could run these off and give them to any infantryman and he would probably be lethal with it. So they become a very popular instrument, weapon in the 12th century. But here we have good evidence in this post-Roman early medieval period that there is some presence of them. And from the archaeological record we have 3 bolt heads and part of a trigger mechanism which came from a Brythonic site, but I think attributed to about the 8th century, so contemporary with the stone. So there were people using crossbows in the period. This is the fabulous Dublin cross, used to stand on the hillside out there in Perthshire. It's now in the church at Dunning. And I think we have probably here a depiction of a warrior king, probably King Constantine, because when the stone was taken off the hillside and was taken in for conservation and recording, lo and behold, we found a nice inscription on the reverse side. It's on the panel which is occupied by the same little horseman, but just on the reverse side of that. And it's virtually obliterated, apart from the first 3 lines, which read Constantine Philus Fergus, so Constantine son of Fergus, who was king of Picts, died around 820 AD, so probably either commissioned to celebrate him as king or to commemorate him upon his death. So quite a nice, useful way of dating the stone to around the first quarter of the 9th century. And the stone is full of other references to biblical King David. So we've got David the harpist, we've got David wrestling with the jaws of with the lion there and protecting his flock. So David, of course, in the Bible, he's everything. He's a man of the arts, he plays music, writes poetry, and he's also a fearless warrior. He's a fearless defender of his flock, of his people. So as kingship becomes entwined with the church in this early medieval period, he is the person to be associated with, because importantly, he is also ordained by God to become king of the Israelites from when he was a baby. This was predestined that he was going to become their king. So he's a great one to identify with. So it looks here as if King Constantine is linking himself to David. And that's quite a common occurrence in Pictish art. Other kings, other people making very obvious and evident visual connections with David, most notably the St Andrew's sarcophagus, which has the most amazing, elaborate depiction of David rending the jaws of the lion. And if all this nobility is getting a bit too much, then I present to you the bullion stone found in the 1960s when they were putting in the bypass that skirts round Dundee, the Kingsway, and there he is in his cups. The horses see them home. He's been out on the lash, and the horse is on remote control. And the fact that it's just going uphill just adds to the comedic value of the image here. And we're not really very sure who commissioned this. It certainly doesn't, I mean, unless somebody wants to be known as a good old guy, it doesn't present nobility, there's no warrior king strength here. This is just somebody who's on his horse, with his shield, but he's quaffing deeply from a drinking horn, and the horse just looks like a weary guy who's, he says, okay, don't you worry, I know the way home. It's really quite funny, and the fact that the bird head terminal on the horn is turned to look back, maybe disapprovingly at the guy who's quaffing from it, just adds to the comedy value. Again, from the archaeological record, we do actually have bird head terminals from drinking horns that have been found in Scotland, some rather nice ones too. None of them look as if they curved backwards to pass on disapproval to the owner. Going back to the Dublin, we have underneath our warrior king, we have this serried ranks of spearmen, and they actually carry on round the sides and I think round the other side as well. So again, in a small scale, I think it's an indication of the army that King Constantine had at his disposal. These sort of ranks of men lined up, and they're carrying spears and shields. And unusually for Picts on Pictish sculpture, they have something, appear to have some headgear, whether it's a cowl or a chainmail coif or a helmet of sorts. Picts are almost always displayed bareheaded, noticeably so. So this is an unusual thing that they're with. So this is kind of Constantine's army on parade for all to see. And we get a similar thing, this is from the Brockbursty in Orkney. Fabulous stone, very fragmented, but we have these three warriors sort of in march. One at the front is a little bit more elaborate. He's got fancier hairdo, a fancy pattern on his shield, so he's probably someone of prominence, a king, a chieftain, with his retinue, his bodyguard behind him. So I suppose we have to imagine this, the symbolism here is, you know, he has men at his call, he has an army that he's in command of. But very, very, very lovely example. And then a similar one, not that far away from here at Easay in Angus, where again we have this line of three men, carved in relief this time and a little bit simpler. But again, the man in the lead is markedly bigger than the others, so clearly the man of importance. You can see also his spear is carved in relief. It actually has a form. The two behind him are just incised lines. So there's a little bit more elaborate effort put into the lead man. But again, I think this is symbolic of somebody with a retinue at his call. And then another example of this is monumentally big stone and falls west of Perthshire, with all sorts of things going on in it, but we were about 2/3 down on the reverse. We have this image of someone leading a cow or an ox, which has a bell round its neck, and then behind that this marching army with swords, square shields and spears. And again you can see bareheaded, Picts are almost always bearded, and no helmets, bareheaded just with their traditional Pictish hairstyle with this, looks a bit like him from the Cornies, kind of swept back here with a little bit of a curl at the end. That's the standard depiction. This tiny little fragment, not really sure, it might be part of an altar. It doesn't appear to be part of a cross slab, or that's so something more architectural. And it's difficult to say with any certainty, but it does look as if we've got trotting or galloping horses, and we've got men sort of proceeding. So it does look as if this is an army on the march, an army on the go. And we have a very similar thing on this one from Dull in Perthshire. This is now in the National Museum of Scotland, but again, probably not a cross slab, probably part of an altar stone. But again, we have these horses on the go, very definitely armed this time. We can see the horsemen have their spears and their shields, and in front of them the soldiers with shields. I think at least one of them has a sword. Note also there are a couple of wee dogs running in train, not the traditional hound that we would see on a hunting scene that would be used to bring down the deer. We've got little terriers here for some reason, I don't know what. But yes, this would appear to be some army on the move. We have images of hand-to-hand combat. This is the wonderful stone that's in the Garden of the Bands at Glamis. Now sadly very difficult to get into because the Bands is in private hands and the new owner doesn't like folk coming into his garden, so he locks his gates. But it's a fantastic monument, and we have this image of these two men wrestling with each other, grabbing each other by the wrist, but also brandishing axes or hatchets at each other. not certain what the meaning is, whether it's some biblical thing or whatever. Interesting to see that above them you have a cauldron with 2 pairs of legs sticking out it, so all part of the richness but mysterious nature of Pictish sculpture. And then this, here is this one. This is in Montrose Museum, I believe, still, from Inchbrayock in Angus, and we have all sorts of wonderful swirly things going on here, some very odd creatures and very odd things. And we have at the top left-hand corner of the reverse, we've got somebody out on the hunt. He's got his sword by his side, his spear, his shield, and it looks as if he's going after some deer. But down below that, we have what is widely taken as Samson brandishing the jawbone of an ass. I love this because it's actually, the jawbone is back to front. If you look at the way the hinge of the jawbone is there, the teeth are on the underside of the jawbone. They should really be facing him. Whoever carved it clearly hadn't paid an awful lot of attention to the slaughtered remains of the animals that he was going to be eating. And why Samson should be showing this to somebody who's clearly a monk, a tonsure monk in a robe, I'm not quite sure, unless he's saying this is what I used to do them in. But that generally thought of as being a depiction of Samson. And at last we now come to an image of war, not just individual people or groups of people who are armed, but we have an actual battle scene from the stone in the graveyard burial ground at Borland Kirk. And wonderful it is too. There's our battle scene. I had to put this in, I just happened to look this up a little while ago. I was doing a guided tour, I think it was Doors Open Day last summer, for the people at Borland, and I thought I'd better remind myself about this. So I looked up the Historic Environment Scotland's statement of significance for the Borland stones, and they've said the black face exhibits a probable battle scene. So I think that's just scholarly people trying to avoid being too definite about something, but I think there's no probable about it. It's hard to imagine what else it could be. I would like to find who wrote this and ask what else did you have? Manoeuvres, war game. So, who's fighting who? Well, one army, those on the left, are bareheaded, so I think they're Picts, because they're Picts, as I said, almost always portrayed in sculpture as bareheaded, and they've got those distinctive swept back hairstyles with a little curl at the end of it. The other army on the right are wearing helmets, very distinctive helmets, so they're clearly not Picts. And we can find good and very similar evidence in the archaeological record for these helmets. This is the one found in the Coppergate in York, Anglo-Saxon, 8th century, thereabouts, 7th century. Distinctive nose guard and flap down the side. Looks very like what we've got on the sculpture for the figures on the right-hand side. And in fact, we have a little piece of Anglo-Saxon carving. This is the Frank's casket. It's a little box, about this big. It's in the British Museum, carved out of whalebone. Very beautiful, very elaborate. But you can see one of the figures here is sporting a helmet that's virtually identical. So I think this is evidence of Anglo-Saxon material culture, and I think we've got it appearing on this Pictish sculpture. So I think we are looking at the Picts fighting the Eagles of Northumbria. So the very obvious thing is that this is the Battle of Duncan in 685, and lo and behold, just a few miles to the southwest of Aberlemno is the hamlet of Duncan, which has been taken by many as the site of the battle, and this stone is commemorating it. The battle is very, very significant because once and for all, I said to you that the Anglo-Saxons had pressed right the way up to the shores of the Forth, and right the way across, down into Galloway, really just hemmed in the Britons into a small area of Strathclyde, and they were constantly pushing north against the Picts, looking to just keep expanding their kingdom. But the Battle of Dunnigan in 685 really puts an end to that expansionist policy, because the Anglo-Saxon king and his two sons are killed at this battle, and it puts an end to them trying to push north of the Forth once and for all. And we're lucky to have some quite good documentary evidence about the battle. Bede, an Anglo-Saxon monk, writes, I won't read about it, you can read that for yourself, about how the king was drawn in rashly into this narrow, inaccessible mountains where he is slain. He describes how the Picts feign a retreat, and this urges the king on, but it's only a ruse on the part of the Picts. They then come down the hillsides and decimate the Anglo-Saxon army. The Isles of Ulster, again, so this is monks keeping a sort of juggle, year by year juggle over in Ireland. They note the date of the battle, even the day, the date, and how King Egfrith and his sons are killed by King brother of the Picts. Well, it's interesting that, you know, Bede talks about the Northumbrian king being drawn into the narrows of inaccessible mountains, and there are no narrows of inaccessible mountains in Dunnigan or anywhere near it. So an alternative has been put forward for a place on the A9, which is hemmed in by mountains. It's got marshy land at the bottom of it, with the River Spey, and it's called Dunathan. So this may be a better location. Certainly fits Bede's description better. And again, modern revision, the kingdom of the Picts is kind of divided into numerous areas, but the one that was the wealthiest, the one that was the most powerful, is referred to as Fortrue. And Fortrue for a long time was thought to be somewhere down about here in Angus, but now scholars are saying that it's more likely to have been up Bury and east of Ross way. So again, if the Northumbrian king was marching against Fortrue, then he would have every reason to be that far north, heading up there to attack his enemy. But he pays your money, he takes your choice. I have friends and colleagues who would die in a ditch rather than concede that it was anything other than Dunnigan in Angus. So go with what makes you happy. The battle is 685 AD, but the cross-slab is dated to the 8th century, certainly the first half of it usually. So if it is commemorating the Battle of Dunnigan, it's not being carved immediately after it, it's 20, 30, 50 years after it. Again, there's no reason why it wouldn't be that. It could be, you know, there's some delay that they're doing this, but it's certainly not an immediate time-related thing. So, what have we got with this scene? Well, we've really got a tableau or a bird's-eye view of the battle. There are no horizontal divisions, but the action is presented in three distinct sort of panels, although they're not physically divided. And so reading from left to right, top to bottom, I think the whole thing reads as a storyboard to unfold the battle. That's certainly how I would read it. And we've got this very distinct, so we've got three registers going from top to bottom, and we've got this very distinct definition between the left-hand side and the right-hand side, the Picts on the left and the Northumbrians on the right. The Picts are advancing, they're going left to right, always and only. None of them are turning around. But you can see the Northumbrians on the right-hand side, they're going in both directions. So right from the get-go, if we read from top to bottom, we can see that the battle isn't going well for them, and if they're not advancing, they're retreating or dying. So our first register, our first line, we've got Pictish cavalry apparently chasing Northumbrian cavalry off the field. You can see in the stone we've got an abandoned sword, we've got an abandoned shield. People are throwing their weapons away and turning tail and running. So right from the get-go, this battle is a one-way affair in favour of the Picts. There's never any doubt who's going to win. It's never in the balance. So in that sense, a little bit of propaganda here as well, I think. Coming down to the second register, we can see we've got Pictish infantry facing off and holding at bay the charging Northumbrian cavalry. And again, nice little bit of tactic. The front man with his sword raised, his shield up, being protected by the spearman behind him, who's projecting out beyond that. So, holding their own. And then at the bottom we have a face-off between a Pict on horseback and a Northumbrian on horseback, and then we have a dead Northumbrian, significantly bigger, so perhaps King Infrith lying there with a spear in his head, being pecked at by a raven. So again, very symbolic and ignominious end for the defeated. So, yeah, could these two people on this bottom register be King Brother and King Ecgfrith, sort of being singled out as the final decisive thing that wins the battle when the Anglo-Saxon king is killed to become food for the ravens? And finally, we finish off tonight with this monumental piece of sculpture up in Murray, on the outskirts of Forres, called Swale Stone. The name is a complete misnomer. It was applied to this, I think, in the late 1700s by scholars who thought that it had been erected by Vigeans, who thought it was erected by Sven Forbeard. So it became known as Swale Stone, but I think, in all honesty, it's definitely not anything to do with Sven Forbeard. So, total misnomer, and there's now a move afoot to have it referred to as the Forest Cross Slab or the Forest Stone. I think it's going to be an uphill struggle because we've got 300 years of tradition referring to it as Swale Stone. It's 6.5 metres high, so it's a challenge to record, and it's no coincidence that I left it to the last couple of years of my working life. It's not something I was going to dive into. 20 years ago I had to build up to this. And now, as you can see, inside a protective glass box, which even on a cold, frosty day, you're down to shirt sleeves rolled up by 9:30 in the morning, if the sun's on it, because it gets fairly hot in there. And in the summer, when it's hot outside, it's boiling hot in there. So it was quite a challenge in many ways. I spent many weeks working on it inside that box, and for the very top part of it, which I couldn't get to and measure and see clearly, I was fortunate enough that the National Museum of Scotland, they made casts of it back in the 1950s for an exhibition. I don't know how you go about making a mould for something that size, but they did. Moulded it in sort of 5-foot sections. And I was able, these are preserved, a few bashes as you can see, but they're preserved in the NMS store in Granton. So I was able to access them, which really helped enormously to get to grips with the stone itself. So that is the finished drawing. at enormous. Working on the casts, I was able to identify, never been noted before, that there are a series of bosses around the head of the cross. They're virtually eroded away now, but if you get the light in the right direction, you can just about make them out. And so nice to see that, and little hints of what may be key pattern inside the arms of the cross. Coming down the face of the cross, we've just got acres and acres of interlace on the shaft and on the base and on the two panels. It's like, it looks enormously complex, but actually it's very, very simple because there are only two different knots. It's one knot repeated over and over, going down the shaft and filling that horizontal base at the bottom, and then a different knot repeated over and over, going down both sides of the cross. So in terms of complexity of interlace, it looks really impressive because of its scale, but it's actually one of the simplest ones to do. There are many other cross slabs that are a fraction of the size, that are massively more complex in their design. And then at the bottom of this face we have these figures, and Jane Geddes, our new president of the Pictish Art Society, has just published a fantastic paper in the Proceedings of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. I think it's available as a PDF online, and she's presented a very convincing case that we've got some kind of inauguration here. The anointing of king, perhaps as a child, to become king. So again, a kind of reference to what happens to biblical King David. He's anointed with holy oil as a baby that sets him on a course. So that might be what we're looking at here. But for our interest tonight, it's the back and the reverse side with this battle scene. Battle scene of monumental proportions. But like Aberlemno, I think it is readable as a storyboard working from top to bottom. Unfortunately, with Aberlemno we could identify two distinct sides in the battle. There is nothing here to distinguish the two different forces, but I think you can read the action, and I think it is possible to decide who's who and what's happening. So let's have a go. Oh yeah, there I'm just saying, Aberlemno, we've got each side occupying one side of the stone, and to a certain extent that is what happens with Swearstone. You've got the same kind of thing. I think the victors, this time, Aberlemno, the victors are on the left, the vanquished on the right. It's always the way around this side. I think on the right hand side we have the victors, the home team we'll call them, and the vanquished foe are on the left. So the victors, we'll call them the whole team, they come in from the right, and the enemy come in from the left or retreat out to the left. So let's have a look at the action and see. So we start at the top. We have a central figure. It's now virtually eroded away, but I think we have a central figure on a horse advancing to the right. So, sorry, from the right to the left. And then below that, 3 rows of mounted men advancing in the same way. So I think here we have the whole team going to the site of the battle, coming in for battle. And note also, we've got a tiny little dog running in amongst the legs of one of the horsemen there. Below that, we have these 5 men in face looking out at us, holding up their swords. They appear to be holding shields, spears also. And the central figure, again, is the head's bigger, The figure's a little bit more ornate in the carving, and he's got either some headgear or just more detail in the hair. So clearly an important figure. I think that's probably our warrior king with his chieftains or generals flanking him as we prepare for battle. And then the next row down, the battle commences. So we can see the home team advancing from the right, swords, shields, and at the middle we've got battle joined, and so the man at the lead there is just cloven his enemy's head down the middle with his sword. So it's all going good. Behind the one who's just got a headache, the next guy is facing into the battle, but the two behind him have already turned and are getting out of here. So again, like Borland, this is a bit of propaganda. This battle scene only ever goes one way, it's never in a balance. The guys who win are always winning, they're always going to win. Yeah, there they go, they're turning the tail and they're saying, I want to keep my head, I'm going. But not all of them do. So, we've got this strange conical thing depicted at the centre of the next panel below, and nobody's really sure what it is. People have suggested it could be a Brock. I think that's unlikely because we're in the wrong era. Brock's the Iron Age. This is 9th, maybe even 10th century, let's say 9th. Brock's 4th century or and 1,000 years earlier. So it's unlikely to be a Brock. A round tower like the one at the Brechin perhaps, that's a possibility. Some people have also said a bell, like an early Christian bell, and that's the clanger, that thing hanging down at the bottom of it, possible. There's a new theory that's been put forward recently, so I'll come to that in a moment. But you can see to the left of this conical feature, we've got a line of headless bodies lined up, and then another one coming underneath it there. And these people appear to have their hands tied in front of them, but they're headless, so it looks as if they've been ritually executed. And then below the conical feature, we've actually got a little cluster of severed heads. So, the people who've been defeated here, if you've not been killed in battle, if you've been taken prisoner, it looks as if there's a nasty fate waiting for you, and certainly not a prisoner of war camp. So it has recently been suggested that this might actually be a tar kiln. Somebody found evidence of such a thing in Eastern Europe. It's a small structure into which wood or coal was put and stewed, and then tar runs out of it. And tar, of course, we know from medieval executions, is used to seal the neck of a severed head when you want to hang it up on Tower Bridge, Henry VIII style, and it was dipped in tar to stop it dripping onto the passers-by below. So it's been proposed that that's could be what we're looking at here. Yeah, interesting theory. Yep, there we go, that's our severed heads. Interestingly, we've got some nice archaeological evidence, I think at least two, and maybe more, mass graves excavated down in England. This is Ridgeway Hill in Dorset, excavated in 2009, and you can see it's a mass grave of jumbled bodies, but over on the top left-hand corner, the skulls are all separate. These are Vikings, and the grave dates from the time of the Great Heathen Army, when this massive Vikings from Norway, from Denmark, from settlements in Scotland, settlements in Ireland, they all came together to put the squeeze on Alfred the Great. And it didn't end well for these guys, and it looks very much as if before the bodies were thrown into a pit. Heads were lopped off. Whether that's post-mortem or whether that was prisoners being executed, I don't know. But we've got some archaeological evidence contemporary to the carving of Swero stone of this practice going on. So yeah, it would suggest that, and I think, I'm sure I've read somewhere that in those days Christians believed if you are decapitated, you're not getting into heaven if your head's separate from your body. So this may be some kind of thing that's been perpetrated to a heathen army by their Christian victors, the army of Alfred the Great. Getting back to our stone, this conical feature is surrounded by spearmen. So again, I'm reading those as the victors, as our home team, who are perhaps preparing the tar in the kiln there for the heads below. And then below that, we have 3 trumpeters with their trumpets raised high, blowing loud, presumably to strike fear into the heart of their enemy, with some kind of war horn thing, and they're led by a man brandishing a sword, and he's actually holding a severed head by its forelock. So the action continues, and then finally we've got 2 pairs of men doing hand-to-hand combat, and in each case one of them is delivering a blow to the other that looks as if it's going to cleave the head in 2, and they are also surrounded by severed heads, just in a nice neat pattern, one at their feet and one between their heads. So it's a bloody scene all in all. Carrying on down the stone, the next register, we've got the home team archers supported by infantry advancing from the right, and it looks as if they are chasing the enemy cavalry off the field. It could be that it's home team cavalry leading the charge, but my reading of this is that given that up to now we've had this victors on the right, vanquished on the left, I would read this as them chasing the enemy cavalry off the field. Here we're definitely looking at bowmen, not crossbowmen. You can see they're holding the bow. And then below this we have more headless bodies, more severed heads laid out under this arch feature. Nobody's quite sure what this is. Could it be a bridge, a canopy? Could it be a representation of a church roof that has little animal finials on it? Certainly. So again, nobody's really quite sure what it represents. But one head in particular has been separated out and put in a box. So something significant is happening here. And then on either side of that, it appears as if we have the ritualistic slaughter of horses. You can see in each case 2 men are stabbing at, wrangling with and stabbing a horse. Certainly, slaughtering a horse is part of a traditional Viking burial, sorry for the horse lovers. But when a warrior dies, his horse went with him into the other world. So that might be what's happening here. And then below that, another panel with hand-to-hand combat, where we've got, again, death blows to the head. You can actually see on each side, the figure on the extreme right-hand side, you can see the sword tip passing out through the other end of the head, and the same one on the extreme left. And then in between, more combat, more deadly blows, and at least one, no, 2, in fact, 2 people with heads locked off in that. So again, more bloody battle going on. And then we get to the end of the battle, the conclusion of it, and the upper row here, we're back to our usual directionality with the home team advancing from the right. At the peak of that, their leading man has just severed the head of his opponent. And he seems to be wearing something, some kind of headgear, a fancy hairdo, helmet, maybe a crown. Certainly, by this time, we've got depictions of kings wearing crowns in Anglo-Saxon manuscripts of this era, so it's not impossible that he is wearing a crown. So maybe again, this is our warrior king leading the charge. And then behind the man who's just had his head lopped off, his comrades have turned and they are fleeing the field, spears lowered, they are getting out of here. And then below that is another row of figures which is now hidden, but we've got a couple of not very good dodgy photographs from about 1926 when the setting of the stone was being reinforced and this row of figures was exposed. So working from these, which is not wholly satisfactory, I was able to get a reasonable, reliable record of what's happening, and it seems to be a repeat of what's happening above. We've got the whole team advancing from the at the centre of it, somebody getting a head lopped off, and then the others are turning tail and running. And I love the fact that, I can't point, the bottom row, first figure, which is now largely gone, so it's dotted, that he's running away. The next figure is also running away. His feet are pointing in that direction, but he's looking back over his shoulder. He's looking back at what's happening. And that's the only figure we've got where the head's turned, looking back at that. A lovely little detail. And then guy behind him running, and then the lead guy head locked off. So the battle's over. It's been a rout. The victors, it was never in any doubt who was going to win. But who's fighting? That's the big debate. Lots of theories on the go. Some people have said that it might be Kenneth MacAlpin, he was king of the Scots. He became king of Pictland in 848, and he establishes the dynasty. His sons and grandsons thereafter become kings of both Pictland and Scotland. But maybe when he seizes the throne in 848, maybe not everybody is happy with that. So it's been suggested that maybe this is a victory of the Scots over the Picts, some argument as to somebody else who thinks they've got their claim to the throne being put down. That's possible. It's certainly the stones, it's about the right date for this to be happening. Other theory is that we've got Pictish king, King Macmail Callum, Malcolm, who is killed in 967, and according to tradition, he's killed near Forres, so in the right region for Swainstone, and his body is hidden under a bridge. So again, that severed head in a box under the arch thing, that might fit. I'm less enthusiastic about that, just simply because a lot of the traditional, the story, the narrative about King Du comes from 16th century historian Hector Boyce, who is a little bit on the flowery, elaborate, I don't know, sort of make it up kind of thing. So I'm less enthusiastic about that. For my money, I think it's almost certainly a victory of the Picts over the Norse at some point in the mid to late 9th century. By the early 800s, the Vikings controlled everything from Shetland, Orkney, Caithness, Sutherland, Easter Ross, Wester Ross, out into the Hebrides. right the way down. So the Murray coast was the front line, and recent excavation of the big Pictish fort at Birkhead, coastal fort on a promontory, excavated by Gordon Noble once again, finds it being burnt to the ground and the stone vitrified round about the 9th century. So again, good evidence of this front line tension between Vikings to the north and Picts holding the Murray, which, as we say, is now thought to be the kingdom for true. So for my money, I think this stone commemorates a victory of the Picts over the Vikings. It's been compared to a cenotaph to honour the dead, one of my former colleagues described it thus, but I don't think it is. I don't think this is some way of honouring the dead. I think this is a celebration of martial power and military victory, and in that sense I think it's more like Trajan's column in Rome. I think this is writ large saying they came and we set the older hawks. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say that anybody who wants to be kept informed about what St Vigeans Heritage Group, when we finally get up and going and a bit more active, want to be kept informed, then you add your name. I'll pop a couple of sheets on the tables here, just add your name and your mobile number, and we'll put you in the loop. But anyway, it just remains for me to thank John very, very much indeed for giving so absolutely freely of his time and all that effort to come here again tonight, John. We're greatly indebted to you.
My pleasure.
You just let me realise just a totally different I am about Pictish stones and the kingdom. And there's such a wealth of knowledge and the skills that you've shown and you've displayed is really outstanding. So just what you did follow the bottom of the pack.
Thank you very much.
It's a very small